I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. To share a little bit about myself, I've had to overcome some of life's greatest challenges, including childhood trauma, addiction, and chronic illness. After experiencing deeper healing, it's my passion and purpose to help other people in the recovery community like you experience the same. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to let you know about my passion and purpose in the form of service, and that's my work as an integrative recovery coach. I offer my service in the form of a one-on-one coaching program called Healing Beyond Recovery. You can learn more about me and my services on my webpage at www.mikegovoni.com. There you can also sign up to receive my bi-weekly vlog by entering your email address. And now for today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Paul Epstein, aka Dr. E. Dr. E is not only today's guest and a wonderful man, he is a good friend and has been one of my personal mentors for over the last 3 years. Dr. E is a naturopathic physician, mind-body therapist, mindfulness meditation teacher, and speaker. He specializes in the healing and treating of people with lifestyle and stress-related chronic disease and integrating biography and biology. He uses mind-body integrative medicine and the clinical and therapeutic application and integration of mindfulness, compassion, narrative medicine, contemplative medicine, relationship-centered care, and trauma-informed health and healing in the role of adverse childhood experiences. Dr. Paul supports, guides, and empowers people in transforming stress, pain, and illness into a journey of self-healing and awakening. As I like to say, if you're in recovery, you've had enough pain, which is the fertilizer to bloom your lotus. And how do we turn our pain into our greatest teacher to support our healing and awakening? Well, let's find out by talking to Dr. E. Without further ado, Dr. E, welcome to the show.
I am very, very, very excited to be here with you, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. All right, Dr. E, let's begin by jumping right in and telling the audience a little bit about yourself and why you became a naturopathic physician who specializes in mind body medicine, trauma, and meditation, rather than just a typical naturopathic doctor who uses herbs, homeopathy, acupuncture, etc. How did that happen?
Oh, good question, Mike. I think we have to go back to the personal as well as the professional. Uh, my journey began when I opened up to the practice and the study of yoga and meditation back in the 70s. And I was drawn to that when my father passed away suddenly, dying on the operating table, having bypass surgery.
Hmm.
The pain of that experience and his death broke me open. And at the time, I had graduated from college and was exploring different careers in teaching and social work. I'd been a Montessori teacher early childhood, and I was exploring how and what I would dedicate my life to and to be of service, which was always my focus and intention in my career. And the yoga helped me deal with the pain and opened up my consciousness to see things a little differently. And so yoga was my healing path of meditation and awareness, a shifting consciousness, another way to see the world, and being with the grief and pain of my father's passing as I started to reflect on who was he and what was his life about and all of the unfinished business that I had carried unbeknownst to me as a burden. And as yoga supported me in my healing journey and my spiritual journey, um, I chose to become a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher back in the 70s. And in those days, there weren't many holistic physicians or naturopathic doctors or even chiropractors in those days were few and far between. And certainly, there wasn't integrative medicine or functional medicine or health coaches like there are today. And so, as a yoga teacher, people would come to my classes to learn meditation for stress and anxiety and depression, to learn yoga for their aches and pains, and changing lifestyle to treat asthma and allergies and arthritis and irritable bowel, the same conditions that people suffer and struggle with today. And what I learned from that is people can heal themselves when they change their lifestyle and they change their consciousness and they practice the 5 points of yoga that I was taught
Mm.
as a yoga teacher, of proper diet, proper relaxation, proper breathing, proper, not in perfect or fanatic, just, a wise way of living your life, and proper meditation and proper physical exercise. So yoga was a really holistic path, not just of spiritual evolution, but of healing.
Mm.
And I was watching people change and heal before my eyes, and I got interested, and I said, "Wow, let me do some healing here." And as much as I loved being a yoga teacher and meditation teacher and lived at the ashram in upstate New York and was teaching and living that lifestyle and getting healthy and healing myself, I decided to go back to school to become a doctor and went through pre-med, did all those programs of science programs, prerequisites, went back to school for chemistry, physics, biology, organic chemistry, was a committed student, did it all in 1 year, went on a medical school interview, and they asked me why I wanted to be a doctor. And I said, and similar to your question, um, I said, because I'm interested in helping people heal themselves and their mind and their emotions. And I read a book called Mind as Healer, Mind as Slayer.
Mm.
And I found out then in the late 70s, oh, there's a school that teaches people to be a holistic physician, that treats the underlying cause, that treats the whole person, that it treats the mind and the body, that supports healing from within. I had learned in Montessori education that learning is a natural experience. You want a child to learn, you create an environment for learning. And that's what we do in a Montessori. And healing was the same thing. It wasn't so much give the person, but teach the person. So that was where doctor as teacher as well. And I took those things very seriously. So I went through naturopathic school and I learned all these wonderful therapies you mentioned, fantastic natural therapies, powerful healing, nature cure, now fasting, cleansing. In those days, it wasn't like it is today. In the late 70s and early 80s, you were like a fanatic, crazy person if you asked somebody to go on a juice fast and do cleansing and detoxifying, and so that's still valuable. I think my work in the mind body standpoint is unburdening and detoxifying of the mind and emotions and the traumas that live in the body.
Mm.
So just finishing up this brief intro, going through school, learning Chinese medicine and acupuncture and herbs and homeopathic medicine and diet and nutrition and some counseling skills. I mean, all fantastic therapies. The one that interested me most as my personal spiritual evolution shifted from yoga to more mindfulness and Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, which interested me a little bit more. And yoga was still essential part of my consciousness and awareness, but I shifted a little bit more to Buddhist thinking and Buddhist psychology, and was studying with Jack Cornfield and Joseph Goldstein early on at Insight Meditation and later Spirit Rock, and later got trained as a mindfulness meditation teacher in the first community Dharma leader training program, and was the lead teacher in my community for a number of years and starting that out, etc. But when I went through school, Mike, it was, I kept asking the question, like, where's the healing? What's really happening for this person? Like you asked me. It's really important for the audience now in listening to whatever we end up speaking about mind body or meditation or healing or trauma or therapy, that they understand where I'm coming from. So that became a question that I would always ask my clients, like, tell me your story. How'd you get to
Mm.
be this way?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your biography? I mean, I know you got a stomach ache. I know your blood test says this. I know you're seeing this doctor and got this diagnosis and are on these pills and this drug. And I'm not against any of that, but I'm always wondering, so what's that about for you, Mr. and Mrs. Patient? And I saw how little that was integrated in their process of healing. So I came to understand that my work was to support people to transform their stress, their pain, their illness, their diagnosis into a journey of self-healing and awakening, not separate from the right doctor or the right diagnosis or the right treatment, be it conventional or functional or alternative or natural or naturopathic. Paths are many, truth is one. Therapies are many, healing is one. I was interested in the healing
Mm,
underneath the
yeah.
therapy and how to integrate that. And I came to understand that all sickness is homesickness. And all healing is self-healing, the journey home to your true self. And that became my art, not separate from you need this diagnosis and this treatment, but integrated with it, kind of like the salt in the soup. How do I engage the patient's consciousness in their soup of healing and integrate their ingredients? And the missing ingredient often was their own consciousness, their own engagement, their own involvement. So
Mm,
it's easy to, give a person a fish, you feed them for a day, teach them, you feed them for a lifetime. So just telling people here, eat this, do this, treat that was great and needed, but how do I engage the patient to understand and see their pain as a teacher and their illness as an opportunity, which it is and was, and actually the gift that transformed them? Look at your life, Mike, and your healing journey, and your spiritual journey, and your recovery journey. If there was ever an example of someone who used their pain and their suffering to help other people, to use it as a vehicle for their own meaning and purpose in life, this is contemplative medicine, narrative medicine. You and I have worked through this. We
mm,
know your
mm.
story. You know your
Yes.
story.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm hopefully in our work together mentoring you, I'm giving you a little piece of everything that you know and do and have experienced to engage people to help find out what's their story. And that became one of my three living questions. Tell me your story. And from your story of pain and suffering and addiction and disease, look at you, healthy, happy, healing, learning, growing, sharing, teaching. Let me just say one more thing, and then we'll take a break in terms of um, another question, or get a comment to move it forward. You many of your listeners may have heard of Sounds True, and Tammy, it's an online program of different teachers and thought leaders and therapists and doctors and meditation teachers and yoga teachers talking about healing and transformation and consciousness, and it's fantastic. And of course, there are different programs that you can listen to, summits and interviews, and these things are available. I'm not doing this as a commercial for Sounds True. The emphasis is she did a program once of interviewing all of her lead teachers. And like you're interviewing me now and asking almost the same question. How did you get to be who you are, Tara Brock? How did you get to be who you are, Jack Cornfield? How did you get to be who you are, Gabby Bernstein? Some popular names.
Mm-hmm.
Every person. How did you get to be who you are, Marianne Williamson? How did you get to be who you are, Louise Hay? Every single person was so fascinating. They all had their own story, but it was all the same. I was hurt. I was wounded. I had a terrible childhood. I went through trauma. I went through pain. I went through disease. And I had to find out how to heal myself. And my
Mm-hmm.
pain became my teacher. My wound became my guide. And now I'm writing and teaching. And that's what I'm doing when I talk to you and you ask me about my truth and how I get like this. I got lit like this because I grew up with a dad who was a hero and a soldier in World War II and lived his life suffering from the pain and trauma and effects of post traumatic stress disease of war and being in the first wave of the beaches of Normandy. And I never talked about it. I didn't know about it until after he died. And like a child of an alcoholic whose parent is wonderful one minute and yells and screams and is in pain the next, my dad was this wonderful guy who all of a sudden would have a flashback. All of a sudden would start screaming for no reason. All of a sudden, or laying in bed at night, he'd have nightmares. And I'm living through this, and no one's no one's telling me, you know, who what's going on. No one's telling me. And deep inside, I knew something's wrong with daddy. And no one was helping him. I mean, they were treating his condition. He had heart disease from the stress and smoking, but they weren't knowing how to deal with the deeper wounds of depression and anxiety and all of those symptoms. And he needed love. He needed somebody to recognize that. That's how we're learning to heal trauma is connection and love and safety and integration of giving that patient that place for healing and helping them touch that wound in the window of tolerance of what they're capable of doing in what we now know is trauma sensitive mindfulness. So that's kind of a big long answer to my whole life in terms of understanding how I got like this. And now it's appreciating the gift that I have to have shared it with you and your audience and people that you'll be reaching to support is gives my life meaning and purpose as well.
Well, thank you so much because you've been a huge influencer and teacher and mentor for me along the way. And I think what's so amazing about your story is you've become who you've become, this naturopathic doctor, totally kind of jumping outside the arena and saying, hey, listen, herbs and acupuncture are great, but also we need to look at the larger whole and we need to get to the root cause, which is the trauma. And from seeing your dad suffering from PTSD and symptoms from the war, you realize that, he was getting heart surgery to do a bypass on his heart. And at the same time, you said, wow, they're bypassing his pain. So, for our listeners on the other end of this, of people who are in recovery, let's shift it in the context of how may they still be suffering in their life in recovery, and why may they still be suffering, and is it some sort of bypassing, right? Is the trauma necessary to address in their lives, and what may that look like?
Yeah, and I think that's the gift that you're bringing, Mike, knowing that and your wisdom in recovery for yourself and your addictions and your healing yourself in ulcerative colitis and seeing all the different avenues. And I don't want to, this is very important. I'm not exclusive in coming to this understanding. I've just focused on it exclusively as a physician, not because any of the other therapies I mentioned aren't also critically important. And I would say most practitioners, naturopaths, are very holistic in their efforts to see the whole person and get to that underlying cause. I just emphasize that more exclusively because that's often the ingredient or the component of care that kind of sometimes gets lost in the shuffle in the need to treat the symptom and the need to bring the disease under control and the need to engage the patient in a journey of healing their biology as well as their biography. I've just chosen to emphasize the biography. The challenge there, as you know, Mike, as someone who suffered with ulcerative colitis, unfortunately, people don't go to therapists for ulcerative colitis. They go to nutritionists who are wonderful and they can help you with the diet and allergies and your microbiome and your leaky gut and all of those factors are critical to that, but it's not necessarily also engaging you in healing and in touching the underlying cause. So we kind of need both. That's the work. I know you were there with me, supported me and assisted me when I taught at Omega. And I taught at Omega Institute this, program, 3-day training in mind body. There were therapists there needing to understand the body more, and there were medical doctors there needing to understand the mind more because they're not separate. In
Yeah.
in that irritable bowel, in that ulcerative colitis is the pain, is the addiction, is the abuse, is the trauma.
Mm.
And in the trauma, you'll find the body bears the burden, the body keeps the score, the body remembers. The body is presenting its bill, as Alice Miller said. And I think the understanding is the challenge is the willingness for the patient to then, are you willing to listen with your heart to the voices of yourself speaking? Are you willing to look inside to try to understand and reflect that same question? Not just how do I get rid of this pain, not just what do I do to treat it, but how do I be with it? I mean, I think that's the beauty of recovery. It's an acceptance, it's an acknowledgement of, hey, I'm an addict, and I wanted to also put this line in, since you mentioned suffering and getting at the cause. Uh, some lines and teachings of Carl Jung. All neuroses is a substitute for legitimate suffering.
Yeah, let me just interject there for a moment. All neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering.
Yes.
So, for people out there who are long into recovery and say their behavior is still neurotic, let's just say, or they're living out these old patterns that are causing them more suffering, what you're saying is that neurosis, even in recovery, is a result of suffering.
Well, what the comment there? This is what John Bradshaw, who I studied with often, who introduced healing the shame that binds and healing the child within, and he, has an alcoholic family history and talked a lot about the ACOA and 12 steps and recovery. That addictions are a mood alterer. I can't feel this, so I'm going to take that and let me avoid it. Let me bypass it. Let me block it. Let me repress it. Let me run away from it. And then we get that neurotic pattern of conditioning is a substitute for the legitimate suffering of growing up in an alcoholic home, of being abused, of being traumatized, of the ACEs, the adverse childhood events. I know you think you're going to have another guest to speak more specifically about that, but the evidence is overwhelming about the connection of childhood trauma and adult disease. So, stopping the behavior is number one, no question. And Bradshaw talked about this all the time. Stop the behavior, then what? Feel the feelings, get deeper, explore your history. Where did it come from? And not to judge or blame, but understand the conditioning that took place generationally, even. This is now in the science of mind body medicine, now wearing the hat of a mind body medicine expert physician, of understanding psychoneuroimmunology, the connection between the brain, the mind, and the immune system, and inflammation, the connection between the mind and these patterns of conditioning in the brain and neuroplasticity that we now know mindfulness can help to change the brain in a positive way. And also the context of epigenetics, that not only do we deal with the stresses in our life now, that everybody's going through the trauma of everyday life, from viruses to um, wars to climate change to financial issues and crises to our own health issues to what happened in our past and childhood. We also are dealing and carrying the burden of our ancestral pain.
Mm.
If you're a black person, you're carrying the pain of that slavery. It's in our genes, and the good news is epigenetically we can heal that with our consciousness, with our awareness. It's a shift in consciousness, as Einstein said. You can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. When I practiced in Israel and set up a center for mind body medicine for a couple of years, and learned that children of Holocaust survivors, they didn't live through the Holocaust and the war, but they suffered from the PTSD because their parents were survivors. And I wasn't in World War II on the beaches of Normandy, but I could have been, because I inherited
Yeah, from your dad.
epigenetically the conditions that my father had.
Mm.
But I needed to understand that because, they said, tell me about your child. I had a fantastic childhood. I, right?
Mm.
Nobody beat me. I wasn't abused, but I carried those burdens and I carried that pain, and I didn't know it. I didn't know it because I didn't know my story.
Mm.
Because I wasn't looking at my story. I was too busy trying to fix this or fix that or change this.
Mm.
So, in the context of, Carl Jung also said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. It's by making the darkness conscious. It's like bringing that wound, that pain into the light. It's bringing that scared little girl or boy, whatever happened, whatever trauma, not to blame anybody, not to be a victim, but to just understand the truth. The truth is what liberates us. And in that context, embracing that is the healing.
Yeah, you've said before, a quote from Alice Miller, I believe, that it's the liberating experience of facing painful truth.
Yes.
And, it was all the way into my ninth year of recovery that my body bared the trauma that I was holding, and it the disease developed into disease, right? And manifested itself into ulcerative colitis.
Yes.
So, for the listeners, if they believe in the disease model of addiction, we can kind of relate it in the same context of, biography biology, right? The reason the story and things that happened to you lived out in the disease or disease of addiction.
Yes. Yes.
And
And
I think a lot of people in the recovery community can't really make that correlation. And as Gabo Mate says, they don't know how traumatized they truly are.
right.
And from what you're saying is it's we have to face that pain in a compassionate way, in a way of understanding, in order to heal that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that and what that may look like.
Yes. And I think at this point, one of the principles of natural medicine is do no harm. So we have to be really careful. I can say things like, in the heart of the pain is the healing, the liberating experience of facing painful truth. It's part of the title of a book with Alice Miller, Breaking Down the Wall of Silence. And she writes, the truth about childhood is stored up in our bodies and lives in the depths of our souls. Our intellect can be deceived, our feelings can be numbed and manipulated, our perceptions shamed and confused, our bodies tricked with medication, but our soul never forgets. And because we are one whole soul in one whole body, someday our body will present its bill. And so when I'm working with people with addictions or illness, I'm looking for the legitimate suffering. I'm looking for, is there a scared little girl and boy inside who feels helpless and needs love? And how do I help the patient, that person, connect with themselves? So you asked that question, and I said, do no harm, because we're talking about touching some very, very deep wounds that people have been carrying for a long time and burying and putting away and carrying as a burden. In internal family systems therapy, they call that the exile. John Bradshaw called it the wounded inner child, etc. Whomever, whatever name we give, it's a part of us that's really scared, that didn't have any choices and any resources in how to deal with and process with that part of us. So they push it away and avoid it and deny it. And when it props up and we don't want to feel it, give me a drink, give me this, let me be perfect, let me eat, let me do whatever. And one of the mistakes that I've made in terms of learning how to touch this area, because I asked people these three questions that I've shared with you in responding to your question now about, so how do we work with this? And I say very gently and compassionately and patiently.
Hmm.
And I ask, tell me your story. Your disease tells a story not just of your cells and your diagnosis, but of yourself and your life. And we need to listen to both stories. And then, are you willing, as a second question, are you willing to listen with your heart to the other voices of yourself speaking? And I'm going to give you an example, a very profound example that really might, everything I'm sharing with you is not just my life, learning from people like yourself as clients and as mentees, learning from my patients I've treated now for almost 40 years who've had the courage to look inside and live these questions. Tell me your story. We now have a whole thing about narrative medicine at Columbia University, understanding we need to know where this came from, what's the cause, and go even deeper to heal the mind and body and the wounded child inside. And I learned all of these tools and skills to help the patient look inside, from mindfulness to guided imagery to various forms of psychotherapy and somatic therapies, working the mind and body, because the answer lies, the body doesn't lie. The body speaks the mind. The
Hmm.
body, the body remembers what the mind tries to forget.
Mm.
The organs weep the tears that the eyes can't shed. And so, back to my dad for a second, when he would go to heart disease, the doctor saw his heart and it was real, but did he have heart disease or did he have the pain and trauma of war?
Mm.
What's the real diagnosis? And one of the articles I've written, if the audience wants to go on a naturopathic doctor news and review, NDNR, I've written many articles on these on these topics of childhood trauma and adult disease and healing. But the third question, which is the essence, and I'm going to give you an example now, Mike, is not just now what do we do that we know what happened, not what do we do that we've listened and there's all of this pain and trauma. What do we do? Not how do we get rid of it? Now what's happening? The paradox there is now we be with it. Now we embrace it. Now we hold it with compassion. And that's where the challenge comes in of do no harm, because I got so good at helping people find that painful truth, they never wanted to see me again because I did it too quickly. I did it too fast. And so I think we have to be delicate and we have to do it in a way that what we're trying to do is be still and tranquil and not seek any answer or solution, not
Mm.
resist it or avoid it, because then we can be with the truth. And the truth liberates us, not our effort to be free. That's a quote from Krishnamurti, paraphrasing. It's the truth that liberates, not your effort to be free. So here's the one example that puts all of it together: mind, body, natural healing, trauma, addiction, my living questions. A woman comes in, she's obese, she has high blood pressure, she has digestive problems, irritable bowel, she has back pain, she has skin stuff. You can imagine how she feels. She needs to lose weight for her mind, for her body, for her health, for her symptoms, for her disease. Except that she's lost 50 pounds 10 times and gained it back 10 times. The recidivism rate for weight loss in our society is over 90%, which means that those programs that people flock to, they work. They lose the 50 pounds, but 90% of the time they gain it back. That's how it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, because there's no healing happening and they're not working with the consciousness. Now, when Mrs. Jones comes to me, I'm using this as an example, and her particular addiction was an eating disorder in terms of her relationship with food. It doesn't matter. It can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be exercise. You know how many people are addicted to exercise without knowing they have an addiction that's covering up some deeper wound and pain?
Yeah, I was one of them for about 10 years.
Or as great as macrobiotics is, you know how
Mm.
I mean, and I was one of these perfectionist people of, yoga and eating perfectly, and I was doing great stuff, but I was doing it wasn't what I was doing. I was doing it as an addict, as a fanatic in my in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Standing on my head, making sure everything I ate was pure, never, I mean, it was good, but how I was doing it wasn't. So I'm looking at intention. And Mrs. Jones comes to me and I say, Mrs. Jones, how do you feel? Why do you want to lose weight? No, it's obvious. Blood pressure is high. She's obese. Look at, she says, look at me. I have to lose weight. How do you feel? She goes, I'm fat and ugly and I hate myself. Now we're talking about the shame, the deep wound and shame that we heap on ourselves. And I said to her, so tell me your story of the self. And she's telling me the dis-ease, and I've lost weight, I've gained it, I did this program, I did Nutrisystem, I did Genetic Craig, I did what Oprah did, I did this, I did that. They worked, but they didn't work. Here I am again. And I said, I'm a naturopathic doctor, Mrs. Jones, and I can help you individualize that. I can look at your diet and your microbiome and your send you for tests looking at leaky gut and help you with digestion and food allergies and explore your thyroid and your metabolism and you know all the possible ways that we can get you to lose weight and hopefully keep it off. And I can get you on an exercise program. I teach meditation, I can teach you how to relax, and I teach yoga, and we can get you to do all of that stuff. But I'm not going to do any of that, Mrs. Jones. I'll do that with you when you tell me, when you can say that you want to lose weight because you love yourself. When you're willing to live the question, how did you get like this? Where's this coming from? Are you willing to stop and tell me your story? And then are you willing to listen to this fat that you've tried to get rid of it and it keeps coming back? Maybe we need to listen to it. So narrative medicine, tell me your story. Contemplative medicine, what's the meaning? What's the message of it? Beyond simply I hate it and I'm fat and ugly and I have to get rid of it and my blood pressure is high and my back hurts and my digestion is terrible. People don't need to be told, don't eat at McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. It's helping them understand what where that comes from, that they can't not do that. That's the addiction, the compulsion
Mm-hmm.
that gets healed when you look deeper. And this transformed my career early on when I was studying. I studied things like NLP, neuro linguistic programming. I started studying guided imagery with Martin Rossman at the Imagery Institute back in the early 80s. And every weekend I would spend on a meditation retreat or a psychotherapy retreat or an imagery retreat. How can I help people look inside to find their own truth? How can I help them be with that? And I said, Mrs. Jones, close your eyes, let an image form that represents your fat. And the image that came up for her was a down comforter. And when she saw that, when she experienced that relationship, because what we're talking about is reflecting and exploring your relationship to your pain, not to get rid of it, but to understand it and to embrace it and to accept it. Tara Brock, radical acceptance. Mike, I know you're taking a great program with her and Jack and becoming a meditation teacher
Mm-hmm.
with them.
Yep.
Right? Radical acceptance. And she began weeping on my massage table where I would do imagery with people and exploring their meaning and message. The imagery I was doing, not close your eyes, imagine yourself thin. Close your eyes and let's listen and talk to the fat, find out what it wants and what it's there for about, which later I understood was the basic premise of understanding IFS, that all parts are welcome and we have to listen to it and find out what their purpose is and explore that and listen to them.
Mm.
And she realized, oh my God, my fat is my friend. It's protecting me.
Mm.
It's a down comforter. And when I take it away, I'm cold, I'm scared, I'm naked.
Mm.
And in that, she became aware of the wound and the memory of what happened to her,
Yeah.
that she wasn't obese. Her fat was her survival. Her fat was her friend protecting the scared little girl inside. No
Yeah.
one gave her the option or the choice or the resources or the support to be with that, to face that, to open to that. Now, what I said about do no harm, it's very important that you only do this in the context of a therapeutic relationship of trust and safety and
Mm-hmm.
connection. Because early in my career, I was so good at that, and then the patient wouldn't come back. And I didn't understand. I said, "Well, wait a minute, we just found out why they've had chronic migraines and chronic pain and why they're this and that. And it's true. And they told me the story and I helped them touch the wound. And they don't want to, because they weren't ready,
Mm.
because it's painful. We're not stupid. We don't do our addictions because we're mean and stupid. The opposite. They serve us to protect us from deeper wounds and pain. All neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering. How do we heal that suffering?
Yeah, and
That's the question.
it's a process.
Exactly.
Yeah, and healing is a process, and it is scary to visit these parts of ourselves and to navigate them. And in my work with clients, it's a process, and creating that container of safety and trust is the first step. It is the first and foremost
Yes.
step in the process of helping someone heal. You mentioned something really interesting, though, that I want to touch upon because I think a lot of people in the recovery community can identify with. And that is, for example, you were talking about exercise, and I chimed in for a moment, and I exercise. I was in the gym twice a day. I was building up my armor, so no one could really see who I was. I was afraid, anybody would touch my wounds or see the vulnerability within me. And you said, from what place are you coming from? So a lot of
Right.
people in the
What's
recovery
your
community
intention?
are yeah, exactly. Like, do you have to build more muscle so you can be seen as a big, strong, hunky dory dude to get more ladies? Or are you building muscle because you genuinely love your temple that you're in and you're taking care of your body? So that's a huge, huge thing to, bring up into conversation here in regards to, from what place are you living from? From what
Right.
place are you exercising from?
Yeah.
And for her to see her fat as a down comforter is very interesting. And that leads me to, with Dr. Sumrock, I just interviewed, he gave me kind of the backstory of ACEs. And a couple of the questions that Dr. Felitti was asking the women about, they were carrying a couple extra pounds, and the women had told Dr. Folletti that they were carrying a couple extra pounds because it made them feel safe because they were sexually abused, and the
Exactly.
couple extra pounds, yeah, made the guys not so much like pray or look at them, which I'm sure triggered some
Well, that's
of those wounds from the
exactly
past.
yeah, that's exactly what I was sharing, and that has to be done very delicately, but I my knowing it, it's the patient that has to understand it. That's where I think, from my perspective, you go slow. And as we did with you, both as a client and as a student and as a mentee, and all of the ways that you and I connected, that's all we did. We took you through that process of tell me your story, Mike. And we got to have a connection. I got to understand it. And we were kind of, working together on it. And then, like, let's listen to it. Can we see it with new eyes? Can we have a beginner's mind? Now we're coming into intentions in meditation practice. And I always say, it's not what you do, it's how and why you're doing it. And I saw this as a yoga teacher. Some people could barely touch their toes, and other people were great at it. But the person who could barely touch their toes and come to the edge and surrender and relax and let go and let be were the real yogis. The ones that were pushing and trying to do this and setting a goal and trying to force it were missing the whole point of yoga. It's
Mm.
not about how far you stretch. It's not about what you look like in the posture. It's about what's going on in your mind and what's your relationship to your experience and how mindful are you in the process and how compassionate are you. Because if you're judging and pushing and driving and striving, and of course you have to make an effort. But if you're doing it, that's the value of yoga, of bringing a mindful awareness to your intention, and so that you're constantly surrendering. I mean, it's a big, and I didn't realize how powerful that was as part of meditation practice in the context of, surrender, let go, let be. And then when I became a meditation teacher more fully in mindfulness, the seven intentions that John Kabat-Zinn speaks about in his book, Full Catastrophe Living: non attachment, non judgment, non striving, acceptance, patience, trust, let go, let be. I know you know them because I forced you to memorize them 10 times
Uh,
in our work
yeah,
in our work
it
together.
and it leads me to your famous quote there. When you change the way you be with things, the things you be with change.
And when you change
And
the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So a big part of healing is how we look at things, what our relationship to it is.
so, part of my work as an integrative recovery coach is supporting people in recovery to achieve optimal health. Making healthy food choices is essential, but we often need additional support through supplementation. Taking high quality supplements has been a huge part of my journey from healing naturally from irritable bowel disease, and I believe in supplementing the body with nutrients to support overall health. Right now, I am offering the audience access to my full scripts dispensary at a 10% discount off all pharmaceutical grade supplements. You can find the link to the dispensary in the show notes below or by going on my Instagram account at Mike Govoni, MikeGovoni, and clicking the link in my bio. Feel free to DM me with any questions. And now back to the show. Yeah, so for the audience, tell the audience why you believe shifting your perception is the first step to healing, right? So maybe in the context of recovery, you could speak about that using mindfulness, meditation, things of that. What would you say about that?
Well, it's like any first step, right? I mean, let's look at recovery. How many people do you know who have an addiction of A, B, or C where their loved ones try to point it out, try to help them be aware of it, try to help them do that? And it isn't until they accept and acknowledge and say, "Oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. Oh my God, I'm a drug addict. Oh my God, I have an eating disorder. Oh my God," in a oh my God kind of healing way. And then from that, they make a choice. That awareness, that shift in consciousness, it begins their journey of healing. And if the only journey of healing is, I don't want to be an alcoholic. No, sorry. Step one, face the truth.
Mm.
Then you start to recover. You've shifted your relationship to it, which is one of acceptance, non-judgment. That's why you go to a meeting. Nobody's looking, oh, you loser, look at you. Why didn't you stop being an alcoholic? You're doing that to yourself. But they're not judging. They're accepting. They're trusting. They're giving, it works if you work it. I mean, all those intentions are part of the 12 steps. And the first step is that shift in consciousness that takes place in step one.
Mm.
And that's what I'm doing also with healing. Step one, how'd you get like this? What's this about? Are you willing to listen to it and look at it? Medicine is not just what's wrong with me and how do I fix it? What's my diagnosis and how do I get rid of it? And yes, of course we need good medicine. I take medicine if I need it. I get surgery if I need it. I see doctors and therapists if I need them, and I do. But the healing comes from what's my relationship with it. I'm the one empowered, and so that context is what you just said, and it's not like I'm trying to help people shift their consciousness, because if I do, that won't work either.
It doesn't
A
happen.
lot of my patients go, "Well, how do I get this? And how do I get?" And if I'm, a lot of the mentees that I have, a lot of people like yourself who are IIN folks who came to me after my mind body lecture and realized, oh wow, this is important stuff to go along with all of the other lifestyle and coaching I'm doing to work with the patient's consciousness. And it's a shift that takes place in the process,
Yeah.
and it's not like, and it's similar to mindfulness where you practice, and the insight, it's called insight meditation. No one can give me that insight.
Mm.
I mean, I've been practicing, whatever, 40 years, and I'm still really appreciating gratitude as a practice. Oh, it's
Mm.
now close. Oh, yes, I'm fortunate. But now that we're going through I'm speaking at a time when the country is recognizing we have a virus and it's spreading, it's a pandemic, and people having to socially isolate, and the stock market is going down. I mean, there's a lot of fear and all of that. And, there's a level of acceptance and trust and calm in the storm that is needed to get through these traumas of everyday life as well as that. And and that's I think I've come to understand in Buddhism too, in the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. And it's a shift in consciousness of seeing the Four Noble Truths, or compassion practice being, oh, this is a moment of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's
Everyone feels this.
yeah.
This is part of being human. And that's a shift. Can you see it with new eyes?
Yeah.
And as soon as you do, could Mrs. Jones, if the only way I could help her was to give her a diet to lose weight, I'm not helping her in the sense that she'll lose the weight and, 6 months later she'll be on another program to lose weight.
Yeah.
But I can't tell her, Mrs. Jones, you have to change your consciousness in order not to be thinking that your weight is your problem, the only thing you can do is lose it, or you're going to be fat and ugly and hate yourself. I have to give her other choices and other resources and other options, and be there with her to face the shame of how I'm fat and ugly, to see that underneath. And I want to say something hopeful in all of this. Same for you, Mike, and me and my journey, and every patient I see. On every, you have a body, mind, spirit, addiction, no addiction, 12 steps, no 12 steps. We're human. And there's no cure for the human condition. There's a healing journey and a spiritual path,
Mm.
and the choice to go on it. As Viktor Frankl said, everything can be taken from a person but one thing: the right to choose one's own way in any given set of circumstances. Having choices is what's liberating. You are liberated, and you are liberating, and you are healing and growing and recovering in leaps and bounds because of the choices you're making to face it, not be trapped, not be victimized, not to suffer. And that's what you're teaching. That's the gift that you're giving people, not per se whatever you may have learned from me and other mentors and other teachers, but what you've learned from who you are.
Mm.
And I can stand here or sit here and talk with you about this and encourage people to open up to their painful truth, because that's what it will be. But to do it with an open heart of compassion, because you and me and every other patient I've seen, all us human beings who carry our wounds, and all of those special leaders and teachers and guides and gurus of Sounds True and everywhere else, they're human. And what's beautiful about it is, look at who you are today, Mike Govoni,
Aha.
from where you've come
Yeah.
and what you've been through. My God, if that's not a testament to the human spirit, if that's not a testament to possibility and options and choices that people can have. So, as tough as it is, you know better than me how tough it is to stop an addiction. You know better than me how tough it is to heal ulcerative colitis and going to 100 different doctors telling you 100 different things and taking 100 different pills and getting 100 different diagnoses, et cetera, et cetera. And you know there's still more options and choices that you have.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
now you're not a scared little boy on his own. You survived. So you've already lived through the worst. So healing can't, even though it's painful, it can't be worse than having lived through it
I know, and I see people, clients over and over
because you
again.
survived.
Yes, yes, and it's so important to really let people know that, you know, it's painful to heal and it's painful to stay stuck. But when
Yes.
you,
There are,
yeah, when you're open and willing to do your deeper work, then the healing is on the other side, although it's painful to heal.
of course it is. There's two kinds of suffering that Ajahn Chah, Jack Cornfield's teacher, speaks about it's painful to heal, yes, but it's painful not to, as you said as well. He said there's two kinds of suffering. One is suffering that leads to more suffering. Don't heal, don't stop your addiction, don't go into recovery, right? Stay with a substitute for legitimate suffering, or seek help, seek support. Only you can do it. You can't do it alone, one day at a time. And I can't think of anything more painful than what you go through, what you went through to break your addiction, to heal your addiction with your 12 steps. I'm horribly painful and difficult. But so is not doing that was painful and difficult. And that's the choice you have to make. When the day comes when the risk to remain closed as a bud becomes more painful than the risk it takes to open.
Mm,
It's that leap of faith that I'm going to stop trying to get rid of my suffering. I'm going to stop trying to avoid my suffering. I'm going to stop trying to run away from my pain. And I'm going to stop
mm,
and face it and be with my humanity, with love, with compassion, with support. If I could, this is, coming full circle, just to mention my dad for a minute. When I grew up, Mike, and this is before, like I said, when my father passed away, I couldn't stop crying. I didn't even know where the pain was coming from.
mm,
And I know you just lost your dad, and I shared with you in the note that I wrote, and I just want to mention it now. We're talking about pain and suffering. And you wrote in your note, as you were feeling the sadness of your father's passing, whatever the issues were, you also felt tremendous joy in some way of alleviation of suffering and freedom. You said he's no longer suffering, in your sense of joy for him, and joy feeling a release, an unburdening with his passing.
mhm,
And I remember when my father passed away, and I couldn't stop crying, even at the funeral. We bury in the Jewish faith, we bury our dead in a cemetery in a casket, and we don't even put a tombstone on it until a year later. We do an unveiling because we recognize the grief process and to respect that wound and sort of keep it open, not just cover it up. And I remember at his death feeling the wound and the pain was so great on the one hand, but I was unburdening. I was releasing that pain. I was healing that pain. I didn't know it at the time, but it was very eerie. This hurts, but it feels good. And I looked around, and I had my heart was broken open. I understand what that means, and I just felt so much love. And to this day, I don't think I've ever been more alive than I was standing
mm,
at my father's grave. Both couldn't help feel the pain and grief that I had been carrying my whole childhood and my whole life, unbeknownst to me, that just broke open. And it also broke open to the place inside of my heart. And that's what allows me to talk with you and be me to bring people to that truth and that pain.
mm,
And when I was growing up, I didn't tell one part of my dad's story that I think is important about who I am and why I do what I do in terms of mind as healer, mind as slayer. And if anybody saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is also a story of mental illness and how we deal with it in the society. And one of the things that happened with my dad, he had anxiety and he had depression and he had paranoia, and they weren't able to treat it properly. And they didn't have it properly. They didn't understand post traumatic stress. They called it shell shock, whatever. You see the movie Saving Private Ryan, and we know the trauma of war. Our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, number one cause of death is suicides. We know the pain and the trauma, psychological pain and trauma of war is. And my dad, obviously in that first wave, he survived. And the issue of what they did in those days was shock treatment.
Mm.
And what that does is fries the brain. What that does is let's kill the part of the brain that's not functioning optimally because we don't know what to do. We don't know how to heal it. And here we are, 44 years later or more. Yeah, 44 years later. And we now know there's neuroplasticity, that the brain changes, the mind changes with attitude, with awareness, with love, with consciousness, with mindfulness,
Yeah.
that you can change the brain. You don't have to fry it and destroy it. And why I'm telling that is after my father died, I was having a repeated dream. And when my dad was struggling, telling my story, we lived in a three-room apartment. Me, my mom, my sister, and my grandma who lived with us. Five people in a three-room apartment. We didn't have much space in the South Bronx. And we were struggling because my dad was having a hard time. And we had a long corridor. And I remember being a little boy, and I was 7 years old when my father was first taken away to a mental hospital and given shock treatments. And he was gone for almost a year, and I was never explained where he was. I was told he was away working. And when he came back, I'm just sharing with you my trauma, what explains what I do. And when he came back, I just, he wasn't the same person because he didn't have any affect. That's how that affects you. So he was my dad, but he wasn't the same person, if
Mm.
you can imagine. And after he passed, I had this dream. I think I've shared this one with you, but I was holding my father in my arms, and he was asking, "Don't let them take me." It was at the end of a long corridor. We had a long hallway in our apartment when I was growing up. And here's my dad. He was struggling with anxiety and fear and paranoia. He trusted our family, but nobody else. And he's saying, "Leave them alone. Don't let them take me." And in my dream, guys in white coats are coming. And I don't know if this happened literally, but this was the dream I had. Guys in white coats are coming and they're pulling my father out of my arms. I'm trying to hold him. And I'm screaming in my dream, "Leave him alone. He only needs to feel his pain."
Wow.
It's like there's a part of me knew that at that time as a little boy. Something wrong is daddy. Why isn't anybody helping him? And in my career as a doctor, as a therapist, as a meditation teacher, as a yoga teacher, I think that has stayed with me in terms of how I came to be this way. It's yes, get diagnosed, take the drug, get the surgery, do the treatment, eat the diet, do all of that, treat it for sure, the biology. But we have to look at the biography from a mind body standpoint. And even if you're seeing the therapist, of course, see the therapist, but integrate it, tie it to your ulcerative colitis, to your migraine headaches, to your heart disease, to your cancer, because the mind body connection is real. And when I see clients, that's what I see. Leave them alone. They only need to feel their pain. How can I help them face the truth?
Mm.
How can I help them see their truth with love and compassion? They've already suffered, they've already been through the worst, they've survived. Now let's heal.
Yeah.
Now let me give them the resources, the awareness, the choice. And like your life is an example, even more than mine per se, in terms of what you struggled through in your life that you share with your clients and in your blogs and in your podcasts and in your website and in your work and what is inspiring you
Mm.
and inspires me in supporting you and being a colleague of yours now and a friend of yours now.
Mm.
It's that's the nature of the beast. We're just helping people face the truth.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. And
And it's a painful truth, but we have the resources to do it. We have each other. We have support. We have love, and it's so it sounds simplistic. It has to be done delicately, gently, and that's where again my what I've taught you or mentored you with is, in addition to everything else that you know and are learning and are doing and being, live these three questions. Tell your story. What happened?
Mm,
Let's find some healing in that.
mm,
Let's listen to it. Let's touch it with mercy. Let's touch it with awareness. Let's not try to fix it and get rid of it. Let's hold it with compassion. It's a scared little girl or boy that needs to feel safe and was hurt, whatever the wound. And let's be gentle and patient and kind and loving. And let's be with the truth.
mm.
That's what liberates us. And I think that's uh, the opportunity. We teach what we need to learn. You and I are still healing ourselves from our pain,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's for sure. And if you're on the other end of this and you're listening, whether you're new in recovery or you've been in recovery for a long time, then you're whole the way you are, and you're one of the most resilient human beings that are on the face of this earth right now. You've come so far. Right, you've like you say, Dr. E, which is one of the most powerful quotes you've said to me, but it's so simple, and I've said it to many, many, many clients before, is the war is
Yeah. So,
over.
so,
So the war is over. The worst of it is over. Now, recovery just isn't about abstinence. It's about becoming free, alive, present in the here and the now, and understand and really experience the wholeness of who you are. And it's from and through our pain that we get birthed into something else, right? Something has to die in order for something else to be born. I
yes.
think that's
Yeah.
something you've shared with me in the past. So,
Yes. Well, I just want to say, and that's the beauty in recovery. The wisdom of the 12 steps is it naturally, doesn't let you try to get it. It forces you, in a sense, stay with step one. Just be there, one day at a time. I mean, there's such wisdom in that, right? What is what is Buddhism? Be here now. Be with
mhm,
the truth of this moment,
yeah.
one day at a time, and the rest it follows. And you could be wherever you are in the 12 steps. You see that you didn't just graduate from one to two. You're still always doing one. You're still always doing two. The depth of awareness and insight and understanding and appreciation and healing and transformation of consciousness is ongoing.
Mm,
So that's what I think you're offering people is great. You're in recovery. And there's more. Not that where you are isn't great, except where you are. It's not like you have to go here or there. But if you can open to it and be willing to explore, there's so much that you can see. I mean, an interesting experience I had in all the zillion trainings I did in meditation. We had one, I forget the name of it, but it was a day of silence, but for an hour you were to just sit outside and meditate and reflect on one spot on the earth.
mm,
And what did you notice and see in the leaves of grass, in the ants, in the flowers, in the this and the that? And it was amazing, amazing how much was this is just a mindfulness exercise of how much was happening and seeing that we were not aware of, that we
mm,
didn't notice.
yeah.
And it's the same thing when you meditate. It's like be in the moment and observe the breath.
Mm,
What's the experience of the inhale and the exhale?
mm,
You know, and you when you're doing yoga and you're surrendering in the forward bend, the Paschimottanasana asana, like it's not just doing it, it's being in it and what's happening and embodying it. That's the word now of really embody. Like how do you embody your recovery?
mm,
Not to get to step two, but to be in step one.
mm,
Step
yeah.
2 will come.
Yeah.
And if you're in step 4, step 5 will come by being in step 4, not by trying to get to step 5. And if you
Mm,
could imagine just being wherever you are in that process of your healing and recovery, it naturally moves you to
mm,
the next
yeah.
because the truth is what liberates you. It's like it's the opposite. When Mrs. Jones had the courage to face the wound of what her fat was really about, she didn't need to be told what to eat or what not to eat. She didn't have to go on a diet. When she was loving herself the way she was, when she was having compassion, when she was embracing that little girl, all of the diets that she had been on had all of the elements she needed, but now it wasn't what she was doing, it was how and why she was doing it.
Yeah.
She was doing it with love and acceptance,
Yeah.
not to get rid of.
Mm.
And that's the opportunity and challenge when you do your recovery. It's such a wonderful, powerful moment of healing. That moment of step one is really facing your truth. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict.
Yeah.
I can't deny that anymore.
Yeah.
And as scary as it is, as painful as it is, that's the beginning of your recovery.
Mm.
And I'm saying, as a therapist and doctor, that's also the beginning of your healing.
Yeah.
And the healing journey and spiritual journey have the same starting and ending point. Let's integrate them. Let's make the healing journey a spiritual journey, and let's make the spiritual journey a healing journey.
Mm.
So 12-step recovery is a healing journey, and your ulcerative colitis is a spiritual journey,
And you
and they're
can't
not
and
separate.
yeah, and you can't separate them. They're not separate.
They're not separate. They're not separate. And and again, I want to come back to, we have to tread lightly. That a mistake isn't the word. I don't know if that is, but I just realized I wasn't there. Not many people were looking at trauma in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't as ubiquitous and understood in the ACEs as they are today in terms of integrating them in care. And so I only knew that people's stories were connected to their disease of their minds and bodies, and I got very good at opening the story, opening to the painful truth. But I didn't realize that I wasn't giving people, beside myself, the resources to within themselves to be able to window of tolerance and ability to open to it, to face it. So it's like learning to swim. You can't just jump in the water. Oh, I found the pool, jump in. No, you're gonna you're gonna be afraid to drown and never want to go near the water again.
Mm.
So you gotta go slow. And that's why I do my questions, because there's a natural evolution. And while you're doing your questions, you can be doing this, you can be doing that, you can be taking yoga classes. So it's kind of a seamless thing. It's not, oh, we found it and let's clean it out and we're done. No, all of it has to transform at the same time.
Mm. Yeah.
Just like you don't go linearly from step one to step two to step three, they're all happening all at the same time in different ways. And the consciousness is shifting, right? You're seeing with new eyes.
Yes, and it's a process, and if you're on the journey right now, wherever you are, just remember that, be patient with yourself. Love all of yourself, right? All like you say in IFS, all parts are welcome. And just remember, that in recovery, they talk about it's a spiritual malady or whatever it may be. I'm gonna say a beautiful quote that Dr. Sumruk sent to me. He says, the Navajo have a word, Sizoni, which means to walk in beauty or harmony. In order to do that, the physical and spiritual self cannot be separate. So this journey is about taking, all the parts of you along for the ride and really, using your journey, your experience, your life, your pain as the vehicle in the doorway to experience deeper healing, freedom,
Right.
and awakening. So it's been a wonderful conversation thus far, Dr. Ian. I just want to, for the people who are listening,
Can I just add one more thing, Mike?
sure.
Add one more thing? Okay. A couple things. And then one more thing. I want to emphasize compassion. I want to emphasize not trying to get anywhere with this. Meaning, it is true. We're all human, and we all suffer from that reality. And many of us, in different forms, have been traumatized and wounded in our lives now, and many of our ancestors have been wounded, and we carry the burden of that epigenetically and otherwise. In addition to everything that we can do to be with it, one way to be with it is with compassion, is just acknowledging the truth of it. And I think that's really important in the context of recovery and facing our pain. The simplest that Pema Chodron teaches, a meditation teacher, she teaches the context of Tonglen, which is to reverse our conditioning, to push away our pain, to resist it, to avoid it, to get rid of it, and instead welcome it. Breathe it in. Breathe it in. I mean,
Mm,
Mike and I have been doing a lot of talking here, and it's been good talking and heart talking, and great to connect with Mike and share and support him and you in your process and journey of healing and recovery. And just to touch whatever we've said, whatever wounds and pains, even without stopping and doing a guided meditation, just even imagining as I'm speaking, to open your heart and welcome, breathe in your pain, your suffering,
Mm,
not to not to get overwhelmed by it, not to fix it, but there's a part of you you've recovered. Like Mike said, the war's over, as I've shared with him, and you have the strength, and let it in, but touch it gently, with compassion, with mercy, and breathe out compassion. Welcome it. Say, come here. And can you see your wound, your addiction, your struggle, your pain, your story, however scary it is? There's a heart in you, the heart that will not die, a bodhicitta that Pema Chodron talks about, that no matter what is there, is who you are, is your essence.
mm,
I can't do this work. I can't mentor, teach, support Mike, guide, be a colleague with Mike on this work, not knowing that every one of us has this place inside of us, our true self, our loving self, our compassionate self, our bodhicitta,
mm,
with these qualities of courage and compassion and clarity and connection,
mm,
that is capable, has the confidence and competence to open up and heal these wounds inside of us. All sickness is homesickness. All healing is self healing. Journey home to your true self. So breathe it in, breathe out compassion, and we're all in it together. I just wanted to do an ending on that for close out our discussion from my point of view. And I have a website for anybody interested in articles. Feel free to visit them.
Yeah, please tell the audience, where they can find you, Dr. E, where they can find and learn about you, your work, upcoming events you may have. Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, drpaulepstein.com. I have a website. I have some videos on YouTube, and I have some articles I've written for NDNR, and a lot of good information on my website. And I speak and I teach all over. I'm going to be teaching in Mexico and Peru, doing a Spanish language thing, but I'll be teaching in English. So if you want to get on my email list, go to my website and put that out. And I'll be teaching 3-day trainings in learning to live these questions, and how your biography becomes biology, and how to heal them and integrate them. And I do, as Mike shared and how we connected, I do some mentoring work for those practitioners that want to bring this into their life and work as well. And I do Skype sessions, etc. Um, and I'm looking forward to work that I'm going to be doing with Mike over the years, and partnering up and bringing our gifts and talents together to support people. Um, and Mike is an embodiment of uh, of what he teaches and what he's learned, and he's the real deal. Um, and I'm honored and privileged to be working with you and supporting you in your journey of reaching the world and sharing your gifts with them. So thanks for the opportunity, Mike.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. E. And if it wasn't for you and everything that you've learned, experienced, and taught to me, I don't believe I would be where I am today. So, thank you. It's been a wonderful journey. And until next time, be well. What a deep and rich conversation today with Dr. E. I want to say thank you for listening and tuning into today's show. I know we covered some difficult topics, and one of my sayings is, if we can't talk about it, how are we ever going to heal it? If you are looking for support on your path to recovery and healing, please feel free to check out my one-on-one coaching program called Healing Beyond Recovery. You can sign up for a complimentary consult on my website at www.mikegovoni.com and click Apply Now. Be on the lookout for episode 6 with Tim Ringgold. Tim is a board-certified music therapist and columnist for Recovery Today magazine, and the author of the book Sonic Recovery: Harness the Power of Music to Stay Sober. On this episode, Tim and I geek out over neuroscience, optimizing the brain, and Tim schools me on how music can either lead to craving and relapse or immense healing, depending upon how it is prescribed. To learn more, join us on the next show. Remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be. Until then, happy healing and be well.